This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Ever since Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire introduced additional forms to Pokemon like Primal Forms, which are basically just Megas that have LED lights instead of fluorescence, shout out to the environment, we've been wondering what would come next in the next remakes. And with Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl on their way, I thought it'd be fun to look at what possible new forms could be added in if they were to implement new forms as part of the story, just like the Primal Forms were. We'll be ranking them in terms of how possible or just how amazing any new inclusions could be. Let's discuss the 5 possible new forms that could be added into Pokemon Brilliant D and Shining P. Number 5. Origin Forms. Let's start off at the beginning of this list with a simplistic form that could bring out not only a new look to the legendaries and Arceus in these new games, but also one that could add a lot to the stories that are told throughout Sinnoh. As Giratina has its own origin form, it would be nice to see the others in the core 4 have their own forms that show off their origins. What would Arceus, Dialga, and Palkia look like at the beginning of time when Arceus was creating the world? They could all be eggs. Something like Manga Rioran or regular Rioran. While Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl do look to be only recreations of the original games, rather than something that will add new additions, it would still be nice to imagine the certain things that could be done just like they were in RS, or even the new areas in the Gen 1 and Gen 2 remakes. An origin form could work really well, as in the original games they are talking about the lore behind the legendary and mythical Pokemon who are based on time, space, and creation. And being able to see them in a different form with a more simplistic look, as if this was how they looked at the beginning of time, could add in a lot of different elements to enhance the story. Even the Pokemon Legends game is set in the past with Pokeballs made of wood. What if this wasn't the Trojan horse we all knew? What if it was just Arceus from 4,000 years ago? Maybe non-legendary Pokemon evolved from different origins as well. Charizard could have evolved from an Oranguru back in the day, through a different form of evolution. You don't know, you weren't there. Seeing the true origins of each legendary mythical Pokemon story in Sinnoh could be really exemplified by something like an origin form and could really add a lot to the mysteries behind this region. Number 4. Regional Forms. Speaking of the region itself, regional forms would be a very interesting new addition to remade games. This would be a great way to add new Pokemon to a remake that also stays true to the region itself, and a new form of regional forms, seeing as it'd be the first remake inclusion of these types of forms, bringing new Pokemon back to the simpler times. Instead of trying to introduce brand new Gen 4 Pokemon like they were kept in the recycling bin during the original development of the games, it would allow other Pokemon to be brought in as if they were from Sinnoh or made during Generation 4. While that might be confusing and bring up the question about how a Pokemon from Generation 5 to 8 be brought back into Sinnoh style when those generations came after the 4th generation, some Pokemon do have origins that show they were made before a generation came to be. Arceus was at the beginning of the universe, and if I'm not mistaken, the beginning of the universe was before Generation 1, so there's that. I would primarily focus on Pokemon from past generations being brought into this style. But I think regional forms would be a great way to not add additional spots at the end of the Pokédex while still bringing new Pokemon to Pokemon remakes. This might not happen in Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, but as I've mentioned in one of my previous videos, if say Unova was being remade, that could be an interesting idea to implement with how unique of a style that region had. Nevertheless, seeing Pokemon like Furret or Dodrio being stylized in the look that Sinnoh has would be a really interesting design to come up with. Even a main story element with Arceus, Dialga, and Palkia could be done in the opposite direction, where the ideas of time, creation, and space bring them through every region and give them a small form chase to acclimatize them to the regions they are traveling through. But that's assuming the story is built upon in the remakes, and, well, it'd be really interesting as well to see what parts of the art game designers or even fan artists would focus on to make non-Sinnoh Pokemon feel like they were created in this region. Just like you do when seeing fan-made Alola forms going for that consistent tropical vibe. Number 3. Alpha and Omega Forms. Another type of form that could really add an additional layer to the main Pokemon in Sinnoh would be forms based around them in Alpha and Omega states. While an Alpha form might be similar to an origin form, as it would be these Pokemon from the beginning, it's also close to saying a Beta form, and there's that Beta Arceus sprite that everyone likes so much. Let's just use that again for a new form to Arceus. It is the Alpha Pokemon after all. The Omega Forms, however, is more of the focus, as the Alpha Forms would be the starting point to get these ending forms. They would be similar to how Primal Forms were just Mega Evolutions with extra steps, but also allow you to see these Pokemon in an even more storied form, as this would be their endgame state. It would be the final state they would be in, and their most powerful forms, reaching the max power level. Just gonna add a new God tier section to the tier list. While it might not be the most competitively sound form for all battlers out there, it could just be another story-based form to see these Pokemon in a new design, in the same way that Eternatus Max isn't playable, or at least if it was, it would be banned. Seeing as this is the generation with the creation trio, and Alpha and Omega is a phrase that represents the beginning and the end, it makes a lot of sense to be suited towards the Diamond and Pearl story to not only tell it, but to also add a lot more. Alpha and Omega forms have a nice ring to it too. They sound really familiar for Pokemon for some reason too, but I can't figure out why. Number 2. Primal Forms. There is a chance that the Diamond and Pearl remakes might bring back Primal Forms from the previous generation remakes. Primal Forms were actually introduced in Pokemon Mystery Dungeon with Primal Dialga, who is the main Pokemon of one of these two Generation 4 games. Not gonna tell you which one though, that'd be spoilers. So while it might be a similar style to Primal Groudon and Kyogre, or even similar to the exact Primal Dialga from the spin-off games, it would be interesting to see it made in HD, or CD, and see what could be made with these new forms. I decide since it is a form that's already in the games, we could go a little more in-depth into what a primal form for Dialga and Palkia might be, as well as possibly Arceus. Since right now, I'm thinking because of Giratina's origin forms, if any of these Pokemon were to get a form, it would just be on these three, and not the one that already has one. As the primal form for Dialga in Pokemon Mystery Dungeon was it losing control of its abilities and becoming villainous, it could be a dark form of each of these Pokemon that could fit with the Distortion World theme. In Japanese, Primal Dialga is also called Dark Dialga, so having a more evil version of both Dialga and Palkia would be an interesting part of the story. Maybe in their primal stages, they're more opposite to how they normally are. Primal Dialga could keep losing track of time, and Primal Palkia would just keep coming on too strong, couldn't give anyone some space. It would be a different form of primal reversion than Oras, as the primal forms for Groudon and Kyogre were their true forms, and these would instead be Dialga and Palkia's false forms. Number 1. Alternate Forms. With time traveling and all the other elements of how can we make this story way too complex and fix it in a different generation sometime in the next 20 years, alternate forms would really help add more time to the longevity of the Pokemon series by making things even more complicated that they need a whole new century to bring it all together. Alternate forms will be based around alternate timelines. It could be similar to if, in an alternate dimension, Arceus was trapped in the Distortion World and Giratina was locked away in an action replay. This would be interesting, as similar to Dialga and Palkia having evil forms, it would more so be Giratina having a pure form, and Arceus having a Distortion World form. I think there's a lot more to be added in than just good and evil forms if we're talking about alternate timelines of Sinnoh. There could be the end of the world forms that everyone is trying to stop. You get there, AZ is in a wasteland, dried up past the expiration date Celebi from the movie is there too, Palkia and Dialga are in their primal forms, and Arceus and Giratina now have human forms to tell you how to undo this. Well, that's way too much for the Pokemon company to ever want to do. The possibility of what could be is there with the origins of these Pokemon. There could also be alternate forms where you reach the Nirvana timeline of Pokemon with everything in pure grace, opposite to the apocalypse. The world is beautiful, everyone has not only a well-paying job, but also one that they love to do, or they're retired. Everyone has an electric car, everyone wears clothes only from Givenchy, nothing else. It's paradise. You could reach these different types of forms with the best ending compared to the worst ending, the normal ending, or the subpar 7.3 too much storytelling ending. If there were alternate paths shown to you, just like Arceus did in those movies it starred in. It could also feature Arceus in a creation form where you get to meet it at the beginning of time to unveil the creation of Pokemon that's talked about so much in Sinnoh, and see it in a possible form that displays it before it became Arceus and created everything. At this point, Arceus was just the greatest of all, instead of the greatest of all time, because time wasn't invented yet. Arceus could even look like a younger version of itself, the same way Mewtwo looked younger in its short movie about its creation. With the many tools available to you, you can create just about any site with ease on squarespace.com/JethroTex. We've talked about some of the custom templates available to you on Squarespace, like entertainment and podcasts, but maybe you're the type who likes to travel, post food, or get into a career of photography. Squarespace has you covered in 4K with design templates to jumpstart your own self-made templated career. Squarespace even allows you to connect with your audience with their Squarespace member areas that will allow you to interact with dedicated members of your audience and generate revenue for the aspirations you can progress towards with the focus of your new Squarespace website. Use their traffic overview to see how many visits, unique visitors, and page views you get over time. Gain insight into the top traffic sources that your viewers are visiting. If you make something incredibly cool here, you might see me as that one unique visitor that keeps coming back to your site every 20 minutes. I don't have enough things to do in the day, I'm just browsing at my computer, I would actually do this. Head over to squarespace.com/JethroText for your free trial, and when you're ready to show the world your newly created website, thanks to their tools, make sure to click that link in the description to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. That's squarespace.com/JethroText for 10% off your new site.